The moment that shattered Prince Harry's last illusion of royal protection didn't happen quietly behind palace walls. It exploded into the open like a scandal no one in modern royal history had ever seen. Because on the morning of March 4th, 2026, a single document landed inside Buckingham Palace, and within hours, King Charles III delivered a response so cold, so final, that it effectively severed the last financial thread tying Harry to the crown. The demand? A staggering $59 million. And the answer from the king? Not a penny. What followed was not just a family dispute, it was the public collapse of a royal rebellion that had spiraled completely out of control.
Sussexes' needless legal action against the world's most read newspaper.
The setting could not have been more symbolic. London, early morning, March 4th, 2026. Prince Harry was already standing on the edge of a legal disaster after his explosive privacy lawsuit against the publisher of the Daily Mail began to crumble inside the royal courts of justice. For months, he had presented the case as a historic battle against tabloid corruption, a crusade that would supposedly expose the darkest secrets of Britain's press. But behind the dramatic headlines and fiery courtroom speeches, the reality unfolding inside the court was very different. Evidence was collapsing, witnesses were wavering, and the strategy that Harry had bet his reputation on was starting to look less like a victory and more like a slow-motion implosion. But instead of retreating, Harry doubled down. Under immense pressure from mounting legal bills and the possibility of losing millions in damages, Harry's California-based legal team made a move so audacious that even seasoned palace insiders were stunned. They issued a formal financial demand to Buckingham Palace itself. The message was simple and outrageous. Since Harry believed he had been defending the honor of the royal family against the British media, the monarchy should cover the cost of his legal war, not part of the cost, not a symbolic amount. The entire $59 million bill. Inside palace corridors, the reaction was immediate disbelief, because when royal treasury officials opened the invoice and studied the itemized breakdown, what they saw looked less like legal reimbursement and more like a fantasy wish list written by a man who had completely lost touch with financial reality. The list began with $15 million for attorney David Sherborne and his legal team, an army of researchers and consultants hired to hunt through decades of archives, searching for evidence against Associated Newspapers Limited. Then came $12 million set aside as a contingency fund, a preemptive demand for Buckingham Palace to cover the damages Harry expected to pay the newspapers if he lost the case. But the numbers didn't stop there. Buried inside the invoice were figures that stunned even veteran royal accountants. $5 million for private security logistics during Harry's London visits, despite the fact that the British government had already ruled he was responsible for paying those costs himself. Then a jaw-dropping $10 million labeled honor restoration fees, a completely self-valued figure Harry allegedly calculated as the price of defending his own reputation. And finally, the most unbelievable charge of all, $17 million in opportunity cost, compensation Harry claimed he lost because the trial forced him to step away from potential Hollywood deals. Add it all together, and the total came to exactly what Harry demanded, $59 million. But the palace had already reached its breaking point. King Charles III had been carefully distancing himself from his son throughout the entire legal saga. While Harry battled the tabloids in court, the king had deliberately scheduled official duties elsewhere, including a high-profile visit to the Northwood Permanent Joint Headquarters and diplomatic engagements in Italy. To royal watchers, the message was unmistakable. The monarch was not just avoiding involvement, he was signaling that Harry's war with the press was his war alone. So when the demand arrived, Charles didn't hesitate. Within hours, the palace issued a response that insiders describe as one of the most brutally direct statements ever delivered by a reigning monarch to his own son. The king made it crystal clear that the British monarchy had no responsibility whatsoever for Harry's legal crusade. The lawsuit had been launched against the explicit advice of royal advisors. It had been fueled by personal grievances, and if it resulted in financial catastrophe, that catastrophe would belong entirely to the man who started it. Behind the formal language of the palace briefing was an unmistakable message. Harry had crossed a line that could not be undone. But the king's rejection was only the beginning of the disaster unfolding around the Duke of Sussex. Because at the same time that Buckingham Palace was refusing to pay his bill, something far worse was happening inside the courtroom itself. The foundation of Harry's entire case, the witness he had relied on to prove tabloid wrongdoing, was about to explode in spectacular fashion. For months, Harry's legal team had built their argument around one man, private investigator Gavin Burrows. Burrows was supposed to be the smoking gun, the insider who would reveal a decade of illegal phone hacking and secret surveillance carried out on behalf of British tabloids. Harry's lawyers had presented him as the ultimate whistleblower, the man who would finally bring down the Daily Mail. Instead, he became the man who detonated Harry's case from the inside. Standing before the court under oath, Burrows did something no one in Harry's camp saw coming. He didn't confirm the allegations. He didn't defend the evidence. He completely dismantled it. In a shocking sworn statement that sent shockwaves through the courtroom, Burrows admitted that the documents Harry had relied on, files supposedly proving illegal information gathering, were not authentic at all. They were fabricated. According to Burrows, the alleged phone hacking logs, the lists of targeted individuals, even the timeline of surveillance activities had been created to fit a predetermined narrative. And the reason for the fabrication was almost as explosive as the confession itself. Burrows told the court that he had been in severe financial trouble and had been encouraged by figures within Harry's legal orbit to produce material that would strengthen the case against Associated Newspapers Limited. He claimed he had been promised future financial opportunities, including a lucrative book deal and consultancy fees, if the testimony helped secure a massive settlement victory. The effect inside the courtroom was immediate. What had once been presented as Harry's ultimate weapon against the British press had suddenly turned into a credibility disaster of historic proportions. Observers inside the Royal Courts of Justice described Harry pacing the corridors outside the courtroom, visibly furious as the man he had relied on as a whistleblower publicly dismantled the very foundation of his lawsuit. And the consequences were terrifying, because once Burrows' testimony collapsed, the legal landscape shifted overnight. The Daily Mail's defense team immediately began exploring the possibility of pursuing a counterclaim, one that could accuse Harry's side of attempting to introduce fabricated evidence into a high court proceeding. If that claim were proven, the case would no longer be about media privacy. It could become something far more dangerous, a potential criminal investigation. And as if that humiliation wasn't enough, the next blow was about to come from a completely different direction, one that would expose a betrayal inside Harry's own circle and trigger a royal family rupture no one could have predicted. What Prince Harry didn't realize in that moment, standing in the echoing halls of the Royal Courts of Justice, watching his carefully constructed case collapse piece by piece, was that the courtroom disaster was only one layer of the storm now gathering around him. Because while the legal foundation of his lawsuit was crumbling inside London's most powerful courtroom, a far more explosive betrayal was unfolding behind the polished doors of Buckingham Palace. And this betrayal didn't come from the press or the lawyers or even the government. It came from inside the royal family itself. The bombshell surfaced only hours after King Charles III refused to pay the $59 million invoice. What began as whispers among senior palace aides quickly erupted into a revelation that would shake the remaining trust between Harry and the monarchy. According to palace insiders, the king's firm stance against his son had not come solely from legal frustration or financial outrage. It came after receiving a secret dossier, evidence handed over by someone Harry never imagined would turn against him. Princess Beatrice. For years, Beatrice and her sister Eugenie had been quietly regarded as the last emotional bridge between Prince Harry and the House of Windsor. While the senior royals maintained distance from the Sussexes after their departure from royal duties, the York sisters continued to communicate with Harry privately. They attended gatherings together, exchanged messages, and were widely believed to be sympathetic to his grievances. To Harry, they represented the last allies he still had inside the palace walls. But behind the scenes, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. According to information delivered directly to King Charles, Princess Beatrice had compiled a digital archive of encrypted communications that painted a deeply troubling picture of Harry's behind-the-scenes strategy. The messages allegedly revealed that Harry had been coordinating with none other than his disgraced uncle, Prince Andrew, in a quiet alliance aimed at pressuring the monarchy into financial concessions. The plan, according to the leaked documents, was both daring and deeply controversial. Harry and Andrew, two royals who had both been pushed to the fringes of the institution, had reportedly discussed creating simultaneous waves of legal and media scandals that would overwhelm the palace's public relations machinery. The idea was simple but dangerous. If enough pressure mounted from multiple directions at once, the monarchy might be forced into negotiations. Harry would attack the press and challenge the royal family's silence through lawsuits and media narratives. Andrew, meanwhile, would resist the king's demands regarding his residence and status, keeping his own controversies alive in the headlines. Together, the strategy aimed to create a storm so chaotic that King Charles would eventually concede financial support and restore certain privileges in exchange for peace. It was a high-risk gamble built on the assumption that the monarchy would eventually choose damage control over confrontation. But the gamble collapsed the moment Princess Beatrice handed the evidence to the king. The reasons behind her decision were deeply personal. Only weeks earlier, Prince Andrew had been pulled back into the spotlight by renewed scrutiny related to the Epstein investigation. With the York family's reputation already hanging by a thread, Beatrice reportedly realized that continuing to shield Harry's secret coordination with Andrew could drag her entire family into another catastrophic scandal. In a calculated act of self-preservation, she chose to reveal everything. The consequences were immediate. For King Charles, the information confirmed his worst suspicions, that Harry's legal crusade against the British press was not simply about privacy or reputation. It was part of a broader strategy designed to corner the monarchy into financial submission. That realization transformed the king's response from disappointment into something much colder and more final. The refusal to pay the $59 million was no longer just a financial decision. It was a declaration that the crown would not negotiate with internal rebellion. Because, as the final stages of the trial approached, legal analysts began calculating the financial consequences of his collapsing case. With Burroughs' testimony discredited and the defense gaining momentum, experts predicted that the court would likely order Harry to cover the full legal costs of Associated Newspapers Limited. Those costs were estimated to exceed £11 million, roughly $14 million, on top of the millions Harry had already spent funding his own legal team. In the end, the battle that Harry framed as a heroic fight for truth had produced a different outcome entirely. The court case meant to expose the sins of the tabloids had instead exposed the fragility of his own strategy. The financial demand meant to pressure the monarchy had only hardened the palace's resolve, and the alliances he believed would strengthen his position had dissolved into betrayal and silence. The prince who once believed he could force the world to acknowledge his truth was now facing a brutal conclusion. Not that the press had destroyed him, but that his own choices had.